What's up, YouTube? It's your boy, the Texcan, and today we're going to talk about implicit, explicit, and dynamic typing. Big words, powerful tools. That was an overly dramatic intro. Anyway, let's get started. Now, what is implicit, explicit, and dynamic typing? Big, scary words. They hear them on a C-sharp interview, blah, 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 blah. What do they mean? Well, luckily for you, if you've ever written a C-sharp program, you've used explicit typing. Explicit typing simply means you're explicitly declaring a data type of the variable. So in other words, if you were to say int x equals 3, you just used explicit typing. Congratulations. You now know what you've done. Now, another cool feature C# has is what's called implicit typing. Implicit typing is where the compiler figures out the data type of the variable. You accomplish this with the var keyword. So we could say var x equals 3. Now, outside of this being really crappy programming, you should never use implicit typing with a primitive data type. For example, if that's using the var keyword to declare integers is lazy, bad, and you should give up your job as a programmer if you are currently employed as a programmer and go become a tester or something different. I don't know. Just don't use var with primitive data types. Bad. Very bad. Anyway, when you use the var keyword, you're telling the C# to go ahead and figure out the data type based off of what it has assigned to it. In this case, we're declaring a variable x with the var keyword, and we're assigning it to 3. So guess what? C# going to go, hey, this is an int. Now, as I said, you don't want to use this with actually declaring primitive data types. When would you actually use this? Well, if you got a screwed up long class name. So let's create a class to demonstrate this. We're going to right-click console app, add class. Let's give this a really long name. This is a long class name. Add. And let's go ahead and come in here and create a public void this, and let's call this test method. And what we're going to do is make this a return type of integer, and we're going to return 2 plus 2. Very creative, I know. Bear with me though, we're learning. So basically, we got a really long class name with a test method that ultimately returns 4. Great, perfect. We're on our way to becoming cool programmers. So let's go back into our main program. Now, let's say we want to access that test method in that really long test class name, whatever we named it. Now to do this, we would normally have to write, this is a long class name, object type, we're going to call this call this class name equals new. This is a long class name. We don't have any argument to the constructor. Boom. Okay, so as you can see here, this is a long class name. This is a lot of typing. Luckily, Visual Studio has a lot of this for us. This is a long class name. If I'm going through your code, I don't really want to see this and have to sort through it. So a shortcut in C# is just to use a var keyword. So instead of doing this, we could say var, we're going to call this class name 2 equals new. This is a long class name. As we can see, it's shorter, smaller, happier. I'm a piss poor dollar. Anyways, as we can see, we're essentially declared a class variable 2 different ways, with the var keyword and with the traditional method. Now, this is where the var keyword, in my opinion, really shines. It cuts down on typing. It's some syntactical sugar. It makes life easier for you. Now, essentially, what we did was we skinned a cat two different ways. We got two class names reference the same class. We could say class name dot test method. Actually, let's print this out to the screen. Console dot write line class name dot test method. And we got oops, forgot the parentheses. And console dot write line class name 2. And sometimes Visual Studios is more trouble than what it's worth. But we've all been there. We're programmers. We're learning. We're having fun. Test method, bada bing, bada boom. Okay, so we run this. Guess what's going to happen? Probably going to get 4 in both method calls. If it ever was. Bada bing, bada boom. Okay, so again, to kind of summarize this, the var keyword is just there to shorten syntax. You don't really want to use it with primitive data types, as that's going to make your program almost impossible to debug. And there's one last little tidbit. Once you declare a variable with var, the data type cannot change. So let's say we have class name 2, but let's say we go ahead and say class name 2 equals 3. Guess what? It's not going to work. It's what we're going to get a little error, does not exist in the current context, blah, 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 blah. It basically is telling you I can't change the data type. Now, another place where new programmers kind of get confused on is using the var keyword as a method argument. For example, let's say we have a public static void test method 2. We're going to take an int, call it x. Actually, no, that defeats the purpose of the tutorial. We're going to say var x. Right off the bat, we're going to get an error that says we can't use a keyword in this context. In other words, since the var keyword doesn't allow change, you can't use it as a method argument, which is kind of a bummer. But that's the nature of var. It's basically there the way I've always used it as syntactical sugar to shorten weird class names, declare collections, tuples, whatever you want to do. Now, there's another type of typing called dynamic typing. Now, dynamic typing is a lot like implicit typing. But instead of using the var keyword, you use a dynamic keyword. So we're going to use dynamic, if I can spell, x equals 3. Again, we can declare a primitive data type with it, but in the real world, you never want to do this because this is bad. This is what programming testers do, which is bad. You don't want to be those guys. You don't want to make your program hard to debug for anybody else. When you start using primitive data types when you start using dynamic data types like this for primitive data types, all you do is bloat your program. Not really bloat, but how should I say? You convolute your program to make it hard to debug. You know, you may have some weird data type in there. Is that a float? Is it a double? What is it? I don't know. Is it an int? Is it a string? I don't know. I'm going to have to sort through 50 to 500 lines of code to figure it out. I don't want to do that. I got an 8-hour shift. I'm going home at the end of the day. I don't want to spend overtime debugging this. So, you know what? Don't use dynamic typing for primitive data types. Now, dynamic typing does have an advantage over implicit typing. Implicit typing with a var keyword, the value cannot change data types. However, with dynamic typing, it can. So what we're going to say is dynamic x equals 3. Then we're going to come down here and say x equals 3.3. So here we have x being an integer, and here we have it being a double. We have no issue. We have no squiggly lines. This program's going to compile fine. As a matter of fact, let's do a console.out. A write line, whatever. I'm programming in C++ a little bit today, so never my jargon mixed up. And we're going to run this, and bada bing, bada boom. Money says it's going to be, say, 3.3. Boom, we win. Okay. Now, due to the features of dynamic typing, we can use this as a method argument, and it is actually very, very useful if you're passing in values, passing in objects like GUI controls. You don't know what the GUI control is. Maybe it's a button, maybe it's a text box, and you use something like change a color or change a text or something. This is where the dynamic keyword really shines because you can, like I said, you can use it in as a method argument. So let's do test method, make another test method. We're going to take in dynamic x. Go console.writeLine x. It really helps if you can spell. Programmers, don't be like me. Pay attention. Learn to spell. Always make your methods static when they're in the main method, when they're in the main class file. Always do this little tidbit too. And I'm retarded. I never said I was the most smartest, educated man on the planet. But hey, we're programmers. We have our issues. I'm a human. You're human. We're all human. Okay. So let's call this test method. Let's say test method 2. I'm going to type in 2.2 and test method 2. We're going to pass in a string called Bob. I don't know. Bob's cool. And we're going to delete this stuff because we no longer need it. It's going to convolute stuff. And clean this up, make it easy to read. And run the program. Boom. So as you can see, we have an integer being passed in. We have a string being passed in. It's accepting the argument. Fine. It's displaying the message is fine. Everything's working. Dynamic is an awesome keyword. Now you do have to be kind of careful. As you can see, we just passed in a string and an integer. What if we were using dynamic and we accidentally did an operation on a string that we should on an integer or like on a number, like I try to add them or divide them? It's stuff like that you got to be kind of careful of with dynamic typing. Usually you don't want to use dynamic typing anytime you are using a primitive data type or have a primitive data type in mind. Like I said, this is more dynamics more for class objects, and so is the var keyword. You want to keep these relegated to long class names. Maybe you don't specifically know what data type you're going to use a for each loop or something crazy like that. If you're using it as an argument, make sure that method is you're actually looking to pass in like a class name or another object to that method. So with that being said, my incoherent rambling is now complete. You now know the difference between explicit, implicit, and dynamic typing. Congratulations, you win. So until next time, YouTube, this is Text again, and I'm signing off.